Well, thank you all for joining us for today's Urban Ag Hour. We are super excited that you all were able to join us this morning, and we will hear from an amazing speaker. So the Urban Agriculture Production Small Scale and Beginning Farmer Program is partnered with USDA, NRCS, and FSA to offer this series. And today we are going to hear from Ursula Schuch, who is the University of Arizona's horticulture specialist. Again, we just thank you that we have this opportunity to hear from Ursula, and we will hear from her presentation. And after we hear from her, we will have an open Q&A session at the end. So I will now hand it over to you, Ursula. Let me just stop sharing my screen, and then it's all yours.
All right. You can see the big screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Excellent. So good morning, everybody, and welcome. And like Tiffany said, I am the environmental horticulture specialist, and I've been actually involved in teaching beginning farmer programs for many years. And so I'm very happy to share today a little bit about specialty crop production, looking at different production systems and such. So what we'll cover today are production systems, like briefly about growing specialty crops in the open fields and growing it in the soil. Then, of course, a lot of you might be interested in growing plants in somewhat controlled environment. So we'll look at growing plants in hoop houses that are covered with either shade cloth with plastic or row covers to protect plants from particular things such as cold temperatures or insects. And then we'll look briefly at growing plants in containers outdoors or also in a semi-controlled environment. We'll look a little bit at the necessary infrastructure and then at the types of crops that are suited for certain systems, and talk a little bit about propagation methods for different types of plants and look at what you can grow from seed, transplants, or cuttings, but also what you might be able to sell, for example, transplants or cuttings that you then grow on and sell them to other people so they can continue to cultivate those plants. So when we're looking at crop selection and the production practices, there are a lot of different opportunities. There are a lot of different crops you can grow, how you would market them. Maybe you want to start out and grow some of the things yourself first and see, well, do I like these crops? Do they taste good? Do I grow different cultivars, things that cannot be purchased in the grocery stores? And you want to set yourself off from what people can purchase pretty inexpensively and high quality in a grocery store or at any other kind of venue, because it would be very hard to compete in a smaller setting and have the prices that people can purchase things at the grocery store. So you want to clarify for yourselves for the next 2-3 years, what are your goals in production? And then maybe you have a 10-year plan. So my question to you would be, do you have a business plan? And a business plan doesn't necessarily mean that you have a large business and that you will sell, to restaurants or something like that. It just means that you're starting to think about, I want to jot down what I want to do. And then in 2-3 years, I like to go and produce enough produce that I have, overall an income of so many dollars a year or things like that. So then the question is, what are your products? Is it going to be leafy greens? Will you produce some kind of an orchard crop? And then what is your production cycle? Are you going to produce only seasonal? Will you produce when everybody else has the same stuff that you have? Or will you produce out of season? And will you be able to offer some of the plants that people could not get at let's say, at a farmer's market, and you're the person to produce and offer off-season produce? Are you going to be able to produce high-quality plants year-round? Maybe you have a hydroponic greenhouse, and you will be able to do that. But that requires also a lot of investments. And then the question is, how will you market things? And we don't have really time to go into it a lot today, but the more commitments you make, the more you also have to be able to fulfill them. So in some cases, people will team up with other small producers to be able to deliver the amount and the diversity of produce that would be required, let's say, for a farmer's market even. And then the question is, what infrastructure do you have? Do you have land? Do you have land where you can grow in the soil? Do you have water? Do you have the right quality of water? And do you have any kind of buildings where you have farm machinery already, or are you starting from scratch and you have to purchase everything? So these are all things to think about, and think about how you will start out, what you want to learn first and what you want to experience first, and then scale up to a larger kind of business. And you can see in the images over here, the top two, on the right, they are indoor growing. And the top one, you can see somebody is growing greens, leafy greens. And then in the middle one, you can see tomatoes growing on raised beds. And it looks like there might be plastic or shade cloth, depending on the time of the year and the temperatures that are outside. In the lower one, you can see sweet peas that are grown for flowers. So you would be harvesting these and sell them as bunches of flowers. And then in the bottom image on the left, you can see a transplant plug that is ready to either be transplanted into the soil to grow a larger plant and then harvest, or to sell to other people, to other gardeners, or to other beginning farmers or farmers who want to grow these and then cultivate them so that they can market the products from these plants. There are two publications that I will be referring to throughout this. And one is 10 Steps to a Successful Vegetable Garden. That's a University of Arizona Cooperative Extension pamphlet. And then the other one is Specialty Crop Production Practices for Beginning Farmers in Arizona and the Southwest. So I would highly recommend that you download these if you haven't done so yet, because I'm sure other speakers might have referred to those. So when we're looking at the types of horticultural production, you can start growing in the field. So that would be open field production in the soil. And you can see that the front cover, the front beds in this particular garden over here, they are covered with plants growing in the soil. They could have been planted from transplants, or they could have been sown. And then these plants are irrigated. In the background, you can see a hoop house. And this hoop house is covered with a screen, because this is the time of year when some of the plants will benefit from starting to have a little bit shade as they develop into the summer. And in the wintertime, this hoop house is sometimes covered with plastic to give warmer temperatures, so that the plants that are cultivated inside get warmer day temperatures, especially compared to the plants that are growing outside. So different production systems. Sometimes people are putting pots, or they're putting transplants or seedling flats on benches in a shade house or in a hoop house covered with plastic in order to modify the temperatures in there. So these are all different options. The other thing to think about is, what is your growing substrate? Are you going to rely on the mineral soil in the ground, or are you going to use organic substrates, growing medium, in containers, in raised beds, or in some cases, like in the nurseries where they are growing large trees in containers, those may actually have a mix of organic and mineral soil. So it's important to think about what you want to use for growing, because you have to really work on optimizing that growing substrate in order to grow healthy and well-producing plants. Your other option is to use non-organic substrates like rock wool or hydroponic systems. And that is shown here on the right. And this is the classroom teaching greenhouse at the University of Arizona in Tucson. And the students are growing there always for 9 to 10 months a year, tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers. And they're growing that in these rock wool slabs that you can see over here are covered with plastic, and they have irrigation. So this is a very sophisticated system, and it requires a lot of infrastructure and also daily attention to make sure your plants are doing well. The system in the middle, where you're growing plants in different size pots, that requires also a lot of attention, because in the summertime, if you have a single day and the plants don't get any irrigation at all, and temperatures in the Phoenix area, let's say, are going to 105 or 110 degrees Fahrenheit, you can lose a lot of these plants because you have very little buffer capacity in these small pots, and the soil moisture is depleted very rapidly. Then on the left, you can see plants growing in the soil. And in the soil, you have a lot more buffer capacity. The soil moisture is held longer. And but at the same time, you have to really work for the long term to make sure you have a healthy soil of good quality, and you nurture that soil throughout the years, because you want to keep growing crops that are doing well year after year in this situation. So which crops are appropriate for which type of the production? So when you're talking about outdoor field production, any low-value crops and crops that require a lot of space, for example, potatoes, corn, melons, squash, fruit and nut trees, those are perfect for growing outdoors, because you would not want to waste any kind of protected structure that costs you money for each square foot of growing area. You want to really make the most of the outdoor growth. And then, of course, when you're talking about fruit and nut trees, those are perennial crops that are staying in place for many, many years or decades in order to optimize the harvesting potential. Whereas potatoes, corn, and such, those are annual crops, but still they don't really yield enough money for you to necessitate any kind of structure. And it's really not necessary. The crops just grow well outdoors. Then you can have temporary structures or covers, and that would be a good idea for higher crop values, and you have intensive production in a smaller space. That's really good for some of the berries, like raspberries or blackberries. You can grow these outside too, but if you have very heavy rain or hail, they can definitely damage your crop to the point of where you would lose everything with one hail or very heavy rain event when the fruit are very close to harvesting. Also, it can help you keep some of the birds out if you have like shade netting, for example. Some of the flowers, peppers, tomatoes, container ornamental plants, all of those can benefit from either having a shade cover, sometimes only part of the year, not necessarily year round. And some of the plants also benefit from having some kind of glazing that would protect the plants from heavy rain, or in the summertime, especially the shade cloth, from lowering the intensity of the irradiation and the temperatures. Then a greenhouse. Now we're talking about lot higher investment. You have to put up a lot more money to build this structure, but it is good for high crop value and intensive production. Tomatoes and peppers, even in Arizona, are often grown in greenhouses, and seedlings or transplants that you might want to either sell or use for your own production, they benefit from greenhouses. And if everybody can please mute themselves, that would be very helpful. Thank you. And then the really most controlled environment production would happen in indoor farms. And you can buy now containers that are all set up and have already all the infrastructure, the shelves, the lighting, the control of relative humidity, of irrigation, and everything you need. These are only for high crop values, very intensive production in a small space, but they are also limited in terms of the number of crops you can grow in there. And two examples that are commonly grown in those types of indoor farm in the containers or in very large warehouses that are set up like that are mushrooms or leafy green vegetables or microgreens particularly. But you also have to make sure that you keep these places extremely clean. And once you have some kind of a fungus or any kind of a disease in a situation like that, it can be very devastating because it can spread very rapidly, as opposed to if you have something outdoors in field production, usually diseases and maybe some of the insects, they may not spread quite as fast and they may not necessarily affect the entire field. So when you compare the production in a hoop house to open field or the low tunnel, so the hoop house is the tunnel where you can put either plastic or shade and you can still walk in. The low tunnel is something that just covers the crop itself. So when you're looking at the length of growing season in a hoop house, you have an extended growing season compared to the open field and low tunnels to a certain extent. In the open field, your length of the growing season is weather dependent. So that's why you have to make sure you understand what climate you're growing in. And then in the low tunnel, you have an extended season versus the open field. When you're looking at your crop yield potential and the product quality, in the open field, it depends on the crop and the weather. In the low tunnel, it is usually higher than the field depending on crop and weather. And in the hoop house, you can have yet higher crops compared to the open field and low tunnels. Cost of production, of course, increases when you have more infrastructure, and the hoop house definitely has more infrastructure than the open field and the low tunnel. In our climate, you usually need irrigation in all of them, but then in the hoop house, you may have also some fans in order to have air movement, and you may have some cost of production for labor to lower and raise the sides of a hoop house in order to get enough ventilation. Initial investment is, of course, highest in the hoop house, relatively low in the low tunnels that are only temporary. And then in the open field, again, it depends a lot how much work you need to put into your soil to have a good growing substrate. Labor is really crop dependent, but usually higher in the hoop house and a little higher in the low tunnel also, because usually you have more intense crop production. Pest management depends a lot on the crop and the weather, and it can be higher or lower than in the open field. And pollination control, you need that in the low tunnel, usually not in the open field. Sometimes in the hoop house, if it is very off-season and you have crops like squash or tomatoes, peppers that need to be pollinated, you may have to introduce pollinators. Here's just a brief look at nursery production of ornamental plants. And I wanted to mention those because that can be a business that some of you may be interested in, and you can grow on a very small scale, growing just small plants. You can go very high tech. These are very large operations. This one in the top middle specializes in bedding plants. Then we have an operation here. You can see all the pots that are under partial shade. And then we have flower production. We have citrus production over here in the center. We have tree production in the middle row on the right. And then we have very large trees in boxes that take several years to grow to this size. And we have cacti, succulents, palms, all are produced in Arizona nurseries. And then we have field production of roses that are dug up and then sold when they are transplanted into pots. Some of the fruit trees like pecans and such can also be grown in the field. So I wanted to very briefly mention this. This is an area where I have a lot of experience, and I have taught and worked in commercial nursery production for many years. So if any of you are interested in this, please contact me, and I will be very happy to talk to you about what is necessary depending on the type of operation you're interested in. You need to match your crops to the climate, and you want to produce, if possible, what you can grow outdoors with a minimum investment in structures or covers, because that gives you the lowest production cost and the lowest production risk, unless you have very inclement weather, like some extremely unusual low or high temperatures. Temperature is one of the most limiting growth factors, especially outdoors here in Arizona. And that's why we have, as you may know already, we have cool and warm season crops in terms of the vegetables. You need to figure out if you need a season extension for those cool or warm season crops, and also to figure out, is it profitable? Do people want to have produce that is out of season? And then you need to understand the competition for marketing and which crops and cultivars are desirable by the consumers. So you can grow the most beautiful crop if people don't know how to cook a vegetable, how to prepare it, and be willing and interested in consuming it, you won't be able to sell it. And then if you're investing in structures like hoop houses or greenhouses, you need to know the limits of your climate in terms of what is the wind that you're experiencing at your site? What kind of heating and cooling capacity do you need to have? What is the snow load that can possibly impact this? And then you need to invest in a structure that will withstand those known risks that you have. Now I wanted to look a little bit at the temperature limiting factors in outdoor crop production. Temperature and rain are limiting, but it is very few people in Arizona that can really grow a vegetable garden based on rain, because we usually don't get enough rain in the areas over here. So we usually depend on supplemental irrigation. And this table over here relates to the temperatures, and we have Arizona climate zones and their application to growing plants. That's another publication that you may want to look at if you're not very well familiar with the climate in your area. And so we have the USDA hardiness zones, and that refers to the average minimum temperatures over a 25-year period. And you can see the USD hardiness zones are, of course, the warmest zones in Tucson and Metro. 25 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit are the usual minimum temperatures. But the sunset climate zones, which also take into account what is the climate in terms of elevation, in terms of the number of freezing days, the heat in the summertime, you can see there is a difference between the Tucson and the Phoenix metro area. And the Phoenix metro area is considered a low or subtropical desert, and the Arizona Intermediate Desert is more what the Tucson area, Casa Grande, and also Safford area is in. But Safford even has some lower temperatures. You can see that over here. So it is already in a different hardiness zone. So it's important to understand these temperatures because they affect everything that you're growing outdoors, and they affect the extent to which you might have to protect your plants with some kind of controlled environment. So the basics of crop production. These are soil health and management, crop management, pest management, irrigation management, and then, of course, managing the environment that you may have, your hoop house or low tunnels and such. In terms of soil health management, you need to know what is the soil, what are some of your soil indices in terms of physical, chemical, and biological properties. Do you need to have a cover crop? What is your fertility management? In terms of crop management, what's your crop selection? What are you going to grow? Do you want to grow what grows well in your area? Or do you want to have to fight nature all the time and grow something that is very difficult? If you're planning on selling your crop scheduling is very important because you need to know when can I send something to the farmer's market and expect people to have these the produce. And if I promise to, let's say, give people something in their shared in their boxes, food boxes that I'm selling on, let's say, a weekly or bi-weekly cycle, people are expecting a diversity of crops and not just like, let's say, onions for 3 times in their box. So understanding how to schedule the sowing, planting, and the harvesting and everything, and how that depends on the crop is very important. Pest management is, of course, important, and I know other speakers, no doubt, will talk a lot about that. And it includes the management of insects, diseases, and weeds as well. Irrigation management is very important because, again, you want to use your water wisely and you want to understand what a crop needs and not over-irrigate, because sometimes that can really detrimentally affect the quality of your crop. When you're looking at soil, it requires long-term and site-specific management plans to develop a fertile and biologically active soil. And it's really beyond this session today to talk about it. I just wanted to put up some of the physical, chemical, and biological properties that you need to be aware of and that you need to understand to a certain extent to make sure you know what the limiting factors especially might be in your system. Because you want to, when you're adding, for example, organic matter, or when you're adding organic or synthetic fertilizer, you want to make sure you're adding what is necessary and what is essential, and build long-term soil quality and always have a productive soil. When we're looking at soil quality, people talk a lot about it, but it is essentially a bit of a diffuse term. And it was defined as the sum of the effects of selected soil attributes, those physical, chemical, and biological properties that I just showed you, that are most important determinants of plant growth in a given environment. So again, it's very site-specific and it will vary from site to site. And of course, if you're building raised beds, for example, it will be different than in the mineral soil. But regardless of what substrate you're using, a soil must promote root growth, accept and hold and supply the water for the plant, hold, supply, and cycle mineral nutrients, promote optimum gas exchange. So you have to have your minerals in there, but you also have to have soil, you have to have water, and you have to have air in there. And you want to promote biological activity and accept, hold, and release carbon. So all those are very essential to a good quality soil. However, both for soil quality and soil health, there is not a single measurement. There are different measurements that you can learn about for your soil health that affect it, but there is not a single soil health or quality meter. So when we're looking at the growing system, we need to look at the entire system. How much water is brought in by rain? And the rainwater is always wonderful, especially when it comes slow and steady, like we had over the last couple of weeks in the winter. Summer rains can be sometimes very heavy, abrupt, and they may actually cause erosion, or they may cause even damage to the plants. And then it's important to be aware of, like, what is the pH? And in our desert climate, we usually have a bit of a higher pH. But you also want to be aware of what is the depth of the roots, where they can actually grow. Do you have good enough soil aeration and water holding capacity and such that the roots can go down to that soil depth that you need? So in Arizona soils, we usually have a high pH. We usually have low nitrogen content. We can have lychee, which is a rock-like structure and does not allow air or water to go through. Usually we have low organic content, but we can increase that by adding organic matter and incorporating it into the soil. And we have rapid decomposition of organic material in the moist conditions. And that is good because it releases the nutrients and it improves the soil structure. But at the same time, we have to add some organic material then. So we do have the higher pH, usually over 7, and it can be up to the higher 8s, which can cause some kind of soil nutrient deficiencies. And in some areas, we can have salinity in both soil and the irrigation water. So what is very important before you sign a lease or purchase land, make sure you have soil and water analyses, because it doesn't matter the quality of seed you're using or anything like that. You need to have excellent soil and water quality in order to be able to grow what you want to grow. Cover crops can be beneficial, and so they can overall improve your nitrogen and organic matter and such. They can increase your microbial populations and the diversity, which will help you in your quality, and they can improve soil health and resilience. Now we're going to controlled environments, and the question is, what growing structure do you need? And it really depends on what you want to grow. Most growing structures are used for propagation, early stages of production, sometimes for entire crops. And it really also depends on how much money you have. And do you need that kind of structure? Or can you grow everything just fine outdoors, and you can maybe reach your goals that you have just growing outdoors? So when you have any kind of structure, it often can be covered. The glazing materials can be plastic. They can be some kind of sheeting material that is permanent. Plastic can be maybe taken off, plastic glazing, and then you can put on shade for certain times of the year. So you can have a shade house. A screen house is designed to protect against insects. And you can have any of these structures covered with the different materials. Germination rooms are usually small to larger rooms, very specific to large operations that germinate, let's say, thousands and thousands of plugs, or indoor farms. Those are, like I mentioned, some of those containers. And the greenhouse is the most controlled type of controlled environment, other essentially stepping down from those indoor farms. And it gives you a lot of variables. Usually you can control the air temperature, you can control the relative humidity, things like that. And you can optimize the environment for the crop, but the price is high. The shade house that creates some cooler, darker conditions. And you can see on the bottom right, there's a shade house, and plants in containers are grown under there. On the left, you can see a greenhouse where the roof is open for parts of the day. And then we can have the hoop house or high tunnels, which has very little in terms of heating, usually no heating. It just protects from cold wind or rain. So these are the hoop house structures or high tunnels covered with shade cloth on the left and covered with plastic on the right. Usually in both cases, you can lower the sides in order to provide better ventilation, which is very important in the low desert environment because it can get way too hot very fast. And then you can have, these really high-tech types of greenhouses where glazing is even shaded then with white color. Here on the right, bottom right, you can see plastic glazing that is covered with shade house for part of the year. But this is a very high shade. So for most of the crops that we are growing, you would not want anything more than 30% of shade. This is like 50 or more. That would be for very specialized crops. And then you can have screen houses, like you can see here, that help prevent insects from going in, cold frames that can be opened and closed, germination rooms for the indoor farms on the bottom right. Here's just an example of what you can grow in a hoop house in Tucson. And I just wanted to show you, keeping good records is very important. You want to know what your marketable yield is per square foot, but also what the percentage is. And look at this. We grew the red Russian kale in 2013, 14, and then different kinds of kale the following year. And we harvested. But what happened here in 2014, we got very warm temperatures in February. It caused an outbreak of insects. And those insects, between the aphids and some other insects that we had, we essentially lost 40% of our marketable yield. And so that was really bad. So our marketable yield overall was much lower than of these other cultivars and the other years. So growing even in a hoop house can pose problems if we have extreme temperature events. And you can use then even inside a greenhouse during very cold periods, like here for these peppers, I think those are, you can use mulches on the plastic, and then you can use additional protection to protect the plants from cold. And on the bottom right, you can see what's called the low tunnels or floating row covers. They can protect the plants from insects or to a small extent from low temperatures. Plant propagation. I wanted to share a few things about growing plants from seeds and transplants particularly, because when you grow plants from seeds, you can grow them all the way in a soil or in a place where you have enough room to grow them to maturity, like let's say leafy greens right now, or you can grow woody plants from cuttings. On the bottom right, you see some fig plants that have been propagated. And then once they are a little bit larger and well-rooted, those cuttings essentially have turned into transplants. And then these plants can be either planted in a field for permanent growth into larger containers, grown larger, and then sold or grown a little later as larger plants into transplanted into the field. Or you can grow transplants either for your own use or for marketing. So one of the things where you want to, again, look at your 10 steps to a successful vegetable garden is when do you plant particular plants? We have warm and cool season plants, but a lot of plants like the ones listed here, beans, beets, carrots, essentially a lot of the plants like carrots, parsnips, radishes, rutabagas, and turnips, those are all plants that are grown for their roots that we consume. And those usually do best being grown just from seed outdoors. They don't lend themselves well to being transplanted. Beans and peas, they also do much better direct seeding outdoors. There are a lot of crops that you can grow either direct seed or transplant, but when you direct seed them, they will take longer to be able to harvest them. So for example, broccoli, especially if you're in a colder area, like let's say you're in Camp Verde, in the higher elevation, maybe Prescott or even Flagstaff, you don't really want to sow broccoli or cabbage or even the onions, and definitely not pumpkin and such, because your growing season is so short. You want to start as soon as the area becomes frost-free. You want to have large, good-size transplants to put into the soil to make sure you get as much growth out of them in the soil and you can get them to maturity. So in the lower elevation of the desert, like in Phoenix or in the Yuma area, you don't have to worry so much about it, and you can go and you can sow broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, and such, but it takes longer then. But transplants from a greenhouse, those are really good, again, for areas where you want to have your plants a little faster or where you have a really short growing season. When you're looking into the 10 steps to a successful vegetable garden, there are some really helpful tables in the back, and it tells you that based on the elevation, here you can see 10 to 1,000 feet, 1,000 to 2,000, and then up to 3,000. And then this lower part here, that's from a different page, where you go from 4,000 to 4,500, and then even all the way up to above 6,000 feet. So we're covering everything from the low desert in Yuma and Phoenix to the area in Flagstaff. So you see that the dates are different. And for example, if you wanted to grow Brussels sprouts, which is a winter crop, you would plant those between September 1 and January 1 at the low elevation. But in Flagstaff or the higher elevations further north, you would want to grow these as summer crop. And you really, when you're looking at the crops in the higher elevations, you see that a lot of those are not, you don't really plant anything in January. Asparagus is one of the few things, but that's a perennial crop that you would plant. And that is something where you have a permanent bed for many years. And so essentially, like let's say you want to grow some basil, you can grow that from January to March, plant it now, but I still would be careful and grow it as transplants indoors, because we do get the very cold, freezing temperatures, and even above freezing, basil gets chilling damage. But in the higher elevations, up further up north, you would grow these from May to June and then plant them out for the summer. So it's important to be aware of when you would start something, and based on the elevation and based on your climate and also on your microclimate. So when you're looking at producing vegetable transplants, you want to think about how many transplants do I need and how will I germinate them? So where do you put your seeds? Do you have like a commercial kind of plug tray like you see here and in all these images over here? Or will you put them in other kind of pots? And we'll look at that in a little bit. Where will you be growing them? Usually you need some kind of protected, warmer environment. And a lot of the plants can grow and can germinate under relatively low light. But if you want to grow them to a stage like the middle or the right image over here, you need supplemental lights in, let's say, a residential room. Even if you have light in there, that is not enough to get plants to this kind of quality and to this kind of growth stage, because your indoor light does not have the right wavelength, and it does not have enough irradiation in order to produce the quality plant that you need. And then, of course, when it comes time for transplanting, like the plants on the right over here, will you be selling these, or will you be planting them into your outdoor garden? And what is important is the transplants, just before they are transplanted, when they are essentially at the size where you want to put them out into the growing environment, you need to harden them off. And harden them off means you will expose them to more outdoor conditions, and you can do that slowly by putting the flats in outdoors, maybe just for half the day, and maybe put some shade cloth, like 30% shade cloth or such, and then essentially get them used to the environment outdoors, the lower relative humidity, the fluctuating day and night temperatures, so they don't get damaged when you put them out. If you take them out of either a greenhouse or a very pampered growing condition right away into full sun, some of these plants, they may brown, and part of the plant may actually die, or the entire plant can die if the extremes are very strong in terms of high-low temperature or very low relative humidity. So here are some examples. People use a lot of different kinds of these are called what's called plug flats, and then you can see some of those plugs are large, and then the one over here is very small. Here are some really great ones that can be used. And you can see this whole tray is populated by these plants. This is actually a paper. And so you're growing in a very environmentally friendly way, because that paper can easily be disposed of. Whereas a lot of these other ones are plastic. They can also be reused. But then these jiffy pots, those are compressed pulp, and these are a little bit tricky to grow, especially at the lower elevation, because the moisture can get lost easily from these pots. So lots of different opportunities. The smaller the cell, the smaller usually the plant. This one is really overgrown over here, and this should have been transplanted earlier. And you can see over here, the drinking cups that have a hole in the bottom are used to grow larger size seedlings. And then the infrastructure you need you need to think about, do I grow these indoors on my windowsill? Then, of course, you're limited how many you can grow. And then again, indoors, at some point, you need growing lights. And of course, you have to have irrigation to keep these cells moist. When you grow them outdoors, maybe you have like a small kind of shade house over here. And you can have, different, if it's very warm, if you're in the Phoenix area, maybe you just need shade, or you need a screen, or over here, this is a little bit more sturdy kind of cover. So you have both the shade, but it also will protect the plant from any heavy rain and such. Do you need to move the air in here? Do you need heating mats maybe under those pots? And then you need pots, plug trays, or growing meat and growing media, seeds, and labels. And there are a lot of decisions to be made on how you will do your infrastructure. And then from seed to transplant, what do you want to grow? What time of year? So if you get the transplants and you want to sell them, you need to have them ready when people want to transplant them based on the elevation where they're at. So you need to consult your chart, because if you have, let's say, lettuce seeds ready in May, people shouldn't really be growing those in the low desert. But if you're up at the higher elevation, people can definitely put them out and grow them in the summer over there. And you want to think about how many plants do you want? Are you going to grow 100 or are you going to grow 1,000 or 5,000? How many will you lose during production? What is the price for your transplants so you can recoup your essentially your investment? And keeping good records. So keeping good records is very, very important, even when you start small. What crops will you grow? So what part of the business is most interesting to you? But the part that you need to understand if you're farming and growing and everything, do you enjoy it 7 days a week? Because a lot of the farming requires 7 days a week attention, or at least if it's not you, somebody making sure the irrigation system and the heating system works during those critical times of the year. There are lots of niche markets, microgreens, transplants, berries, flowers, specialty vegetables, honey, lavender, lots of opportunities here in Arizona. And then I will just skip over this, but I wanted to remind everybody that you have to have a lot of skills, from the plant biology to growing in different kind of production systems, to the climate and the weather, and understanding your soil and growing medium, but also marketing your product, scheduling for a steady supply if you become a vendor someplace, thinking about niche markets and value-added crops, the economics of your production. Do you need labor? Do you need to supervise people, train them, and to coordinate supplies and deliveries? So specialty crop production is very intense, and especially when you're scaling up, you want to make sure you understand what is involved. That's why a business plan, even early on, can be very helpful. We have a lot of colleagues here in Extension that are agents or specialists, and so you can look up the people in case you need them. And with that, I stop share my screen, and let's see how do I.
Thank you so much, Ursula. That was a wonderful presentation. I am going to put our survey up on the screen, and then if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask, you're more than welcome to unmute yourself and ask, or send them in the chat. And just before we ask the questions, Ursula, I don't know if you saw the chat, but you have a little fan club in Florence.
Awesome. No, I have not looked at the chat. So yes, the farm cost estimator. Thank you for bringing that up. That's definitely a big one. And I was really so torn because there's so much to present on. And so essentially, the farm cost estimator is a great tool. And at some point, if you want to, we can talk about that. But again, please feel free to reach out to myself and my colleagues and let us know what we can help you with for your specific situation. Yeah, there's lots of great things here that are put in the chat on the resources. Excellent. Okay. So any questions? I'm all ready.
Does anybody have any questions? You can either type your questions in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask them. Either way.
Ursula, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
It's Lene in Florence.
Excellent. Great to hear from you, Lene.
We miss you a lot. You are our hero. I have a question. I'm about to get my first equip contract through NRCS, and we have been pre-authorized for up to 120-foot Gothic Peak high tunnel, 20-foot wide, or I can get 260-foot. Do you think it would be easier for me to manage temperature and bug control, et cetera, with two, or should I go for the drama of one?
That's an excellent question. What I would think about is what is the crop succession throughout the year in these two different places? Would you manage them differently, and would it be easier, like for example, to have transitions? Will you be growing all annual crops, or will you also have a couple of, let's say, perennial crops in any of those?
Originally, on the 120 feet, I wanted to divide it into 4 30-foot rooms for 4 different uses. One, high intense production using a lot of trellis systems to the ceiling. The other for our bedding plant operation, because we have the other gardens around town we grow in the ground, and we just gobble bedding plants. Then I wanted one, we got 35,000 houses coming in here and nothing for any of these people to do. And I wanted to make it an educational center where you can bring your grandkids and plant a 6-pack of seeds, just more of a public zone, and also a little bit of a fundraiser for the foundation that they can tour the whole 120 feet if they want to. And the last one would have been almost like a classroom storage. It would not have water in it. It would have a different function. But being a nonprofit, we're not just going after high yield. We do give all of our food to feed the hungry.
Absolutely. So I would say having two different greenhouses, houses would be better, because you also don't want to necessarily have everybody go, other than maybe a tour, into the high intensity production.
Yes,
because
thank
in
you.
the high intensity production, you may want to keep people out a little bit, because people have they may bring in pathogens and insects on their clothing and such, and it just is a greater risk of spreading any kind of potential pathogens or insects. But at the same time, also the high trellis system and such, you want to really make sure only people who are authorized to work in that.
Good.
And I mean, I don't think it needs high security or anything. I just think it's more natural if you have, let's say, groups of families and such, have one area that is then dedicated to more of the public use, and have another area that is more dedicated to the intensive use and to some of these intensive crops, where you can separate that. And then, of course, if you have a house that has no water or such, I would also really like to talk to you about maybe growing some succulents that are really easy to manage. And then it will be good, to have an area that is hotter and a little drier and such, and where you can teach, some of the residents, the community members, how to grow things easily.
Thank you.
So I look forward to hear from you, and then we can have a chat about what you can grow, and some ideas, and some of the things, just to grow things that are not mainstream. Grow some of the cultivars that people don't know. Let them taste something different. You don't want to compete with what's available in the grocery store, because you're growing more expensive produce that is not available at the grocery store. Even something, like the high-end grocery stores, you want to grow even things that are different from what they have to offer.
Absolutely. Thank you. You're invited anytime.
Thank you.
Bye.
And I think we have another question from Emily. She raised her hand.
Hello there.
Hi, Emily.
Hi, Ursula. So great to see your program today. I have two questions, and they both relate to high tunnels. the temporary, not the permanently installed facilities. So for the low desert, is there an orientation either north, south, or east, west that is more advantageous for our climate, just overall year round, whether we're trying to extend a season or to shade? And then secondly, my question also pertains to, I guess, the flexibility of these structures. And that is, can you talk a little bit about construction materials and components to make these houses movable into different locations in your field, particularly as it pertains to crop rotation?
Absolutely. So the preferred direction of the hoop houses or greenhouses is usually north to south in our climate. And then the only reason why you would want to do it different is if you have extremely strong winds from an area. So you would want to have your house perpendicular to the wind. But we're a lot more flexible than locations further north. But north-south is what you see most commonly and what works best. We've oriented all of our houses in that direction that we've built. In terms of the materials that you would be using, there are some excellent extension publications. Utah State University has those, and I'll be happy to direct them to you. And then the other ones, in terms of being movable, you would want to have some structure in the ground, and then you could move like the PVC hoops pretty easily from one location to the other, but you would want to have the footers, essentially whichever way you anchor your rebars in the ground that you would put your PVC bars into, you would want to have those permanently. And so that could be a little bit of a disadvantage. I would not maybe think about too many areas where I would want to move it to, but I wouldn't think about like that you make 10 movable hoop house areas in your in your growing operation. But again, I'd be very happy to discuss that with you, show you more resources, and let you think about exactly what is the purpose for the kind of crops you're using.
Thank you, Ursula. In particular, I was thinking about setting up a shade house for the Solanaceae, which is so important to rotate that crop and to be able to kind of go back and forth in different locations. But I see what you're saying, where you have rebar on all the beds and then just shift the PVC over to according to your crop rotation schedule.
Exactly.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you.
The other thing is, if you're worried about what happens with the solanaceous crops, you could think about doing solarization in case root pathogens build up. But so the upside is we do get a lot of sun and everything. The downside is you would lose production area. But that is a very good opportunity. And just a couple of days of solarization here in the low desert in June, we tested that in Tucson. The soil reaches temperatures that is at a level where it will kill a lot of the soil pathogens.
Great ideas. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, we're running a little short on time, but if anyone has any questions, I can put Ursula's contact information in the email that I send out. And we also posted a few links in the chat. One is for our Urban Ag Field Day, which will be happening at Native Seeds in Tucson, Arizona on February 3rd. The link will be on the Eventbrite. We also have a beginning farmer and rancher development program happening, and that will be the first workshop will happen on February 13th. You can also find information for that on the Eventbrite as well. And we posted a link to our needs assessment for you all to take, just to kind of help our program in figuring out how we can better help you. And we just thank you all for showing up today. And we thank Ursula for giving such a wonderful presentation. And we hope that you guys have a great rest of your day.
Well, thank you, everybody. And please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm very happy to help or direct you to the right help.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.